I call them walking the walks because I do want to walk through the game world while I do this and discuss it. The first thing I want to talk about is a little bit about how everything came together, how the engine came together. After working on Second Son, Sucker Punch had come together and decided that they needed to have some meetings to sort of figure out exactly what game they wanted to create next. This is a pitch style meeting where multiple people can come together at various different times, have meetings, and sort of give out different pitches. This is the same way that, in fact, a lot of classics are actually made, created, and gestated when it comes to game development. Jason Colno, who's the creative art director, was stating that basically there was 70 or more pitches for exactly what they wanted to do in the game world and what they wanted to create. Interestingly enough, himself and one of the co-owners decided that samurai and creating a samurai story was what interested them. Now, samurai are displayed in all different forms of media, from your different movies, of course, even TV shows at times, depending on when you were alive. And of course, you have your comics, and you have audio dramas, and you have a couple video games. The samurai, though, are romanticized knighthood out of Asia, where you have the European knights as well for ourselves. So in a way, there's sort of a cohesive discipline of military knight in both locations. Now, the difference between the samurai and European knights is that 80 to 90% of most armies were created and made up of samurai, where in the European side, that was actually much smaller. So what you have is a character class, a actual class of people that were living there, that were there to protect the land and the landowners, as well as fight, originally at least, for the emperor. They looked at the different history and they were thinking, what do we do? How do we make a hero in this time frame? And how does this hero end up playing out? Because they knew that what they wanted to do, like Second Son, was initiate the gamer into that lifestyle, make them feel like that character. And I'm going to be honest, I liked Second Son's graphics, but I don't think that story or that world really portrayed that very well. So they looked at the history of Japan. 1274 came to mind. What happens in 1274? Multiple things, but the most interesting part, and the part you play, is the invasion of Tsushima by the Mongols. Of course, Kublai Khan being the main Mongol. Now, it's interesting because the main character in this game is Jin, and to actually become strong enough and prepared to attack Japan through the islands, they actually ended up having to beat the Jin dynasty. Once they had decided their exact time frame, they had a perfect idea for the game. You're going to be one of these samurai characters. And what I like about this is it starts out in a unique way. In a lot of games, you start out with that moment where you have all these powers, right? Everybody's got all these powers. You end up playing and fighting, and then you lose those powers in a cutscene, and suddenly you're weak and you have to get all those powers back, and it never quite feels realistic. What happens here is a duality of purpose for the story's start that occurs in Ghost of Tsushima. No spoilers because we've seen this in the trailers, and this is just the general story here for one brief moment. It starts out with a major battle. Jin is a samurai. He goes into this major battle, and because of the Mongols' continued use of black powder and their bombs and their traps, end up causing Jin and his army to be defeated. This starts out with your redemption arc, where the Mongols have taken over the island, and it is your job to go and take it back. Now, what's interesting here is a forward and past time forward kind of thing that I've talked about in other Walking the Walks, where the world feels alive because it feels like things have occurred prior to you arriving and are occurring if you leave. What I like about this is when you jump back into the story, you are actually taking over forts and castles that you and your people actually created. And there's some cool story bits on that. I'll get to it in a second. But again, I want to talk just for a moment about the story element and why there's a duality there. You start out as that samurai, and when you end up coming back into the game world, you're actually getting skills you did not have before. It doesn't necessarily mean you were weak. In fact, you aren't weak. You still have your basic attacks, and those basic attacks can still do your generic combos, and I like that. But what happens is, as you continue to explore and continue to branch out into this new narrative for the main character, you get these new moves, and it all sort of ties together. Now, when it comes to the graphics engine, what we've got here is Sucker Punch utilizing their particle system for a world that they have decided what they want to do is make it alive. They want the foreground, midground, and background to be completely alive, much like a movie. If you go out and you start filming something with your DSLR out in nature, you'll see that everything moves, even the air shimmers. But in video games, that's not actually how it works. When you put video game items into a video game, you do have to figure out their animations. You do have to work on your resources. So what happens here, as you'll notice as I'm walking through, everything moves. They decided this was going to be their thing. With their heavy work on GPU accelerated particle systems that they had for Second Son, everything in this game world moves and releases particulate into the air or down. And I find the opposing ways in which everything moves interesting. And I don't think this was a design decision by them. But when you look at it narratively, cherry blossom trees are narratively stuck in the zeitgeist of everything that involves samurai. It just is. Everything that involves samurai, from movies, The Last Samurai, to any kind of anime, to any kind of books of any kind, that is one of the parts that sort of always pops up. It is the stereotypical or typical way in which you always think of ancient Japan, and in particular, the samurai. What happens in this world is not only that, but you also have all of this particle effect and everything moving at the same time from the ground up and to the sides in the different ways. Now, this works out and pays off dramatically when it comes to the wind compass, which is a way you navigate, and I'll explain that again. But it also not only adds to a living, breathing world, but what it does is, I think, frames this awesome feeling of the world sort of shedding off its crust as this battle is happening. There's a newness. We all know, well, most of us know, just because of going to school, that any kind of time a plant is releasing all this particulate, it is a time of rebirth. It is a time. That's sexy time, baby. It is a time for that kind of stuff. And the duality there that you're seeing of the cherry blossom trees dropping them down, which is what we normally see, mixed with everything else, works incredibly well. It also, once again, mid-ground, foreground, background, makes everything feel like it's one part. I love the bird flocks here. Bird flocks, another system that they put in place, really does add a dramatic feeling to the sky that we don't get in a lot of games. So I'm going to do a haiku for a second. I want to describe why. There's multiple layers to this game that I think are different than other games. I'm sure when reviews come out, people are going to be like, it's 1, 2, 3, blah, blah, blah. Yes, in some ways it is, but it also layers 1, 2, 3 with A, B, C, Q, and D. It puts different things going on. For example, as I'm doing this haiku, I'm actually doing less to get something. And I find that interesting, and I find it reflected in a lot of what's going on in Ghost of Tsushima's way in which it styles everything. You basically go, you sit here, you look at these idyllic scenes, and you pick 3 parts to create your haiku. By doing so, you create the haiku, and then you get an item to wear. You are crafting via speech. And I think that's interesting. It's not something we've seen in other games, and it's a moment where there's respite mixed with an actual reward. This happens twice in this game, actually. Well, it happens more times than that, but the 2 major times it happens are here, of course, with the haiku, but additionally with the water springs that you get into that raise your maximum health. It's quite interesting in how they do this. Once again, doing less to get more, and I find that cool. This is something we've seen reflected in Red Dead Redemption 2. I love the idea of it. This is not absolutely brand new, but I think that this character isn't a rootin' scootin' smoke wagon throw-in cowboy. He is a samurai, a poet warrior, and to see lack of movement and the more cerebral moment pay off is awesome. And I'm going to travel to another section so we can hear some sounds. That's one thing the game never hesitates to show you is a beautiful place. Let's talk a little bit more about the game design. One of the things I like about Ghost of Tsushima is not only those moments of respite that end up paying off, which is a little bit rare, but also the wind compass. Now, the wind compass is something that was tied intrinsically to their decision to have everything moving. They looked at their foliage system. They created a very free-form foliage system, which allows them to adjust things as they move that scale of this world larger and smaller, especially when it comes to how quests were done. So what you have is this wind compass. Now, what does it do? Well, it effectively replaces waypoints. So you identify a place you want to go, and you have this wind system, which really does indicate where you need to go for the next point. Why is this important? Well, I've talked about this multiple times in other games, and it's something that you'll hear developers talk about all the time, which is map mess. I think we saw this with, let's say, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where you have a completely different world overall, a Viking world, but a lot of people feel it looks the same, and it's not just the animations, and it's not just the movements. It's also the fact that you're looking at it through the same framed border. It's almost like you put a frame... well, you know what? Let's just do this. Let's listen. All right, that worked better than I thought it was going to work, because sometimes when you're trying to talk and that kind of stuff happens, it can be really, really hard to carry a thought process along. So listening to that audio, you notice one thing, I think, almost right away, is just how wide the audio is in this game. Another layer of audio on top. You could hear those dogs barking from far away, but it echoes up and across the land. There's a lot of good refraction, reflection, and ambient carry-off that you get in all of the audio here. It's fantastic. But back for a moment in this wind compass. So you choose where you want to go, and the wind compass shows you where. Now, again, map mess and that HUD reflecting exactly what we've seen in so many other games is removed here. I know a lot of people may look at this and say it's 1, 2, 3 because there are some quests. We'll discuss that in a moment, because I think the quests having various different steps and mythology that they tell you of the game world also helps. But when you get this wind compass kind of thing going on, what happens is you no longer have to jump into the HUD ever. There is no reason for you to go into the HUD unless you're changing out your armor. You are able to experience the world step by step, including me. I think I'm going to reload this location so I don't get that patrol. That always happens whenever I say something and I want to just do a video. You end up getting enemies in it. So talking about that compass again, what that does is allows you to not jump into the HUD, but additionally allows you to actually look around the game world and realize a couple things. A lot of game developers will tell you that in an open world, one of the problems that you can actually get is a situation where you get analysis paralysis. This is when a game player looks and they see too much in the game world. For example, you may end up coming up with a stunning looking tower. And if you have really long draw distances, that stunning looking tower can be right next to some stunning looking mountains. And what this will actually end up doing is causing a gamer to not know, especially if they're not playing like in a VR helmet, there's no depth, not knowing exactly which of those two to go to, where they are in relation to each other, and which one is really your solid moment and what you want to do. So what happens is in a lot of games, they use their HUD, and I love these frogs here. So cool. You get in your HUD, what you get is a situation where most of the time those are identified and you can click on them and you can go there, and there's a waypoint system that you can just sort of figure out even how far away they are many times. Now you can do that in here if you want, but if you don't want to, or you want to click that you want to go somewhere, you're never jumping out of the menu and back in, so you can experience all the other stuff that is in the game world. That allowed them to do two things: push that draw distance out, of course, because of the engine that they're allowed to. And it allows you to experience the game as a whole instead of piece by piece. For example, this patrol, I can see pretty much anywhere in the game world. Hopefully I'll get some video footage here where you can see a patrol from almost across the map. You can see somebody walking, and that allows for you to feel like the entire game world is there. This is something I've talked about where a lot of games will have you feel, especially depending on how they handle their AI, like the camera is facing directly down and just looking at you in the circle of focus. And if that circle of focus is broken by an enemy, boom, they turn on, their AI turns on. Now, what we see here is that a lot of these characters are doing some kind of scripted mechanism of some kind, engaging and beating up a villager or something like that. Let's just go for it. They have a villager. So I want to show you and discuss the system in the way it plays out in the quest. So first, you have your standoff. One of the things that's great about this is the standoff allows for you to showcase moments within the game world that are basic, just like bandits attack, like we have here. But because everything's moving, it always feels like a movie. It always feels like a major duel from a movie, and it doesn't feel like just a group of bandits. It's so great in that way with that standoff. And gone. So this small attack started out with that showdown. It started out with this moment, this cutscene moment. Every single battle can start out that way. You don't have to. But what happens is you have this villager, and let's see what he says. Most villagers have actual data and locations that you can go to. So if you die on this villager, if you die on this rescue mission, boom, you end up losing that data or having to find it again. Let's listen.
They killed my whole family, my lord.
I'm so sorry. Where did it happen?
The crossroads. They stop everyone. If you're too weak to be their slave, they kill you.
Go and mourn your family. Leave the Mongols to me.
All right, I was making sure that was going to pop up. So what you get is you get a feeling that even the most basic things give you information about the game world, another layer. This also occurs even with the collectibles, where you go to various different collectibles and there's multiple layers to either get them or once you do. For example, hopefully I'll find one here, but I'm going to describe it now. The fox dens, where you basically, they allow for you to get more charms. You find these foxes who are not only just sitting there, they're actually playing and moving around the game world. You find a fox and the fox will lead you to their shrine. What's very cool about that is that walk isn't always short. It's sometimes a very long walk, and it allows for you to, once again, take in nature through a waypoint that does not actually require the HUD or the menu system. Dramatic change in the way it allows for you to interact with the game. Even if you don't like the game, I think most of us can agree with that. These foliage systems are also interesting because they put together all these different systems, short and long for the grasses, very flexible system. But they also chose not contrasting colors for a lot of the different items that you see. Even if you do see yellow there, you see a green stem that comes out of the green grass. Now, this is a little bit different than the contrasting colors, or at least very shockingly different colors we see in older games, green and brown, right? Here also we see an incredible variability in the length of the grass, which allows for it to feel a little bit more like a depthy material that you're walking through versus just tall grass. You can see him putting his hand out there in that gladiator moment. We've seen that in other games. I believe Odyssey. Yeah, because I talked about it. I think Origins and Odyssey both did that, but it works very well. Now, it does indicate to use stealth moments, of course, because of that long grass. But what's interesting is stealth here isn't just the long grass, it's also your vision cone and some other things. So it's not necessarily one for one on that. Now we come into these world areas, and I have to say the world areas are the one place where I feel that Ghost doesn't necessarily nail it. They're okay, but there's some low poly, low texture locations and items in some of these places. They do a good job world building, and there are some excellent examples of making it feel like a prop is a part of the world, which we'll talk about in a bit. Hopefully I'll find one of those spots. And I like anything like that, where it feels like a prop that you're looking at, like let's say the wagon, is a part of the game world because you see that wagon being pulled by horses. Those two things are needed to make you feel like you're actually ingrained into the game. And this is something that you'll hear any open world developer talk about whenever they're trying to, decide on their ambient life systems and how they do everything. So I decided to jump to another place where you have very comparative colors for your grasses that show you as well what they can do. Here, I think this is one of the best looking parts of the game. Even though it is a drab color scheme, it is pulled back. It is definitely not super colorful. The reason why this looks good, and Bob Ross once said, a dead tree is just as natural as a living one, so you should put them in the game. That's what I like about this game, is it doesn't really shy away, and we'll cover the color scheme and how it helps memorization of locations and all of that in a moment. But I like how it makes everything sort of fit together in this game, and they have this ability to really make everything feel like there's no jarring lines that you really see between, let's say, grass and the ground around you, even if it's not necessarily incredibly high polygon. Now you see all this particulate. I love this section. I was talking about things feeling like they were part of something. You can see all those tree trunks cut there, and it gives you a feeling that something was occurring prior to make this camp. That's one of the things I like, is this has happened in The Witcher. It's happened in other games where you have that separation between the rural and the urban. And if it's instant, it can feel really off. Even a war-torn area where, let's say, they have walls around a medieval castle, you'll usually be able to see signs of habitation miles sometimes prior to that location. Here, they do a somewhat good job. There's some places that are very good and others that are just okay. Now, this is a camp that I have basically destroyed. I've taken everybody out of, and nobody came to this camp. Most camps, you'll have your characters come back in. This is an enemy base, as you can tell by the actual Mongol tents. So I killed the people in here, and that's pretty much it. Your people don't come into this one. Some they do, but not this one in particular. I like the way it looks also, like everything was just sort of set down. It's a very cool overall look to this. When you think about how the Mongols attacked, the Mongols defeated the Jin dynasty, then they decided that they were going to invade Japan, and they did so thousands of boat, as well as a lot of, captured, or at least you could say almost conscripted kind of armies, where you have Koreans in their army and stuff like that. And they come over and they attack, and they just sort of decimate Tsushima Island. And you can see that, like with this body just burned against this pole here. It's so harsh, and it's just right outside. The Mongols in particular were known for some crazy stuff that they would do to innocents. They in no way, shape, or form felt the difference between the two. And they would do that kind of stuff to incite fear. But I like this. It looks like everything sort of pulled up from the earth to create that camp. And it makes you feel like, once again, the prop is a part of the landscape. Hugely important. I think it's difficult. You have a Kingdom Come, Deliverance, and a couple other games that try to historically in some way accurately reflect whatever warrior caste that they're showing. Of course, with Kingdom Come Deliverance, you started out as a peasant. Let's see if I can. Boop. Seek a deer. Those things, by the way, completely scary when you hear them crying in the night. First time I heard them, I thought it was a spirit of some kind in the game. But when it comes to your warrior, you've got your samurai here, and there's multiple parts of customization that I really like in Ghost of Tsushima. I do like also that they went with the more intelligent Tanto instead of the Wakizashi for that secondary weapon, because you are going to use it for assassination. And originally, the Tanto was technically just considered a knife. The Wakizashi was used, or they believe it was technically used mostly for indoors combat, because a lot of times when two people would meet, they would have to leave their katana behind, but actually not that. I like the Tanto combined with the katana, the Daisho, which is, the big, small sword. I think that actually makes sense for this character, and it fits. A lot of people are probably under the impression that this is in the time frame when the samurai were the only ones who were able to have swords, and it was sort of just about them. That actually occurred in like 1500s during the sword hunt. And just like the one hand per sword kind of thing was actually Musashi instead of something that actually occurred prior to that. Usually prior to that, it was actually whatever you were holding. It was two hands on your katana. It wasn't one-handed grips for everything. That was actually championed by Musashi. So you do see that in this game. In fact, you see for the most part, and this is something that they've talked about, they made sure to get experts to talk about the swordsmanship. So you see me playing the flute. Let's talk a little bit about music, why I think this is awesome. You can actually create that more wind blowing and remind you of a map point that you need to go to by creating and playing that flute. You can also find crickets, singing crickets around the game. I think there were 20, and each one or each group of some unlock various different tunes you can play. Admittedly, I like the first tune. I like the first and I think third or fourth I got, but I didn't like one or two of them. It was something that I was able to feel like just a badass. It adds some weird feeling to the game where like a Grim Reaper Pied Piper mix where you walk up on a group and you start playing your flute and then kick the shit out of them, play it again at the end. Additionally, and this is probably not on purpose, there was a couple times where the music played and had just a bit of a pause right on the same note as the starting of one or two of these songs. So if you time it just right, the song in the background will play, and then you can play the flute, and it feels just a little bit like you're playing with nature. Very cool. Absolutely awesome. Let's talk about color and draw distance now as we see it. So as we know, scientific studies have shown this for years. Color in particular helps everything from focus to memory. And I think one of the things that we see in Ghost of Tsushima is a mix of that as an indicator, not only to keep away from going into that menu, going into that HUD as often as possible, but also a way to differentiate the biomes that you get in Ghost of Tsushima. Remembering that while this is an island, its topography is actually pretty crazy. There's a lot of different spaces here. There's a lot of different ambient life, even back then, prior to Western, people coming in and trading with them. But what you get is these big splotches of color. And this works so well because that draw distance, as you can see, the white goes to the very edge. That draw distance allows for you to once again take in a game world, and you can see these peace lilies, and you're walking through these peace lilies, and you can see the game world from so far away. And you can see, if you turn around and you're on that border, you can see exactly where you are. Now, this isn't unheard of. It's just that when you add it to everything else, it offers a level of immersion that I think is a little bit higher. By the way, I love these peace lilies. They don't move a bunch with your body when you're walking around. That, by the way, Bee's Nest, the first time I saw that, I thought it was some kind of creepy Warhammer 40,000 character. It looked like a mouth in there. It was beehive slats. The first time I saw it, I was like, what the hell? But they really went and they made sure that each biome felt completely differently. The lower level biomes have a lot of mossy locations, a lot of wetter looks to everything. This is something that we see in a lot of open world games that are starting out. But once again, this draw distance being pushed out as far as it is for particular areas makes the world feel cohesive. Speaking of that, let's look at one of my favorite spots. Yeah, look at that. That is a big red color splash. It just works so well for solidifying this place in your memory. And I don't necessarily think the color choices were exact, but as late back as 1930s, and then of course later on, I think 2010, 2013, they did another study which was testing color and what exact changes it made on human psychology, but also our ability to focus and to concentrate. And they found that blue, the color blue, caused the ability to be more creative, where red was actually focused and detail oriented. And I think that's sort of cool here. This solidifies my place, but it also, for whatever reason, is such a bright, sharp contrast to everything else that I felt myself when I first played this on high alert. When I jumped in here, I was like, something is going to happen in this place. Maybe it's just because I'm so cued into something looking this fantastical. Once again, that I love the difference between this location and all of the places around it. One of my favorite places, when I first popped into this location and started riding my horse around, I was just stunned by the ability for them to do something that I think a lot of game makers would want to do, which is to make every place look subtly different. But how do you do it, and how do you make it work within the game system you built, which of course their game system is that system of having everything moving, and they did it. They nailed it. You also see, for the most part, I'll stay away from different armors. I might switch to one armor, but I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, even though you never know what somebody's going to consider spoilers. I'll try to keep it fairly low unless I end up going into a base and want to show you that, because I think the stealth and what you see in some of the stealth locations is actually quite good in how you set it up. The stealth in the AI isn't the best, but the actual way in which you are attacking your own place is actually noted within the dialogue. The dialogue actually states like, oh, we were here as kids. We know this in this spot, which I thought was very cool. Speaking of cool, let's talk a little bit about the quests. Again, I know some people are going to say this is 1, 2, 3. I looked at the quests and I played them, and I was sitting there thinking about it and, really looking at how the quests were lined up. And one of the things that I like, of course, and this is nowhere near a Witcher 3 kind of level for quests, but a lot of the side quests, pretty much everything had multiple layers to it. There wasn't 1, 2, 3 most of the time. There were certainly some, but there was a feeling of just a little bit of a stretch. Like I said earlier, following the fox to their den, that kind of thing. And the interactivity that you can experience when you're not playing it like a checklist. That's one of the problems, I think. I think this might be a duel area. Yeah, okay. I thought I heard him. And each one of the locations usually has 1 or 2 of the duels. But discussing quests for a second, I hear this 1, 2, 3, and I look at a lot of games for quests, and I talk to a lot of developers, and I watch a lot of GDCs, and I try to understand exactly how somebody makes a good quest and what a good quest versus a bad quest, how they're considered a thing. But a lot of times I hear something that pops up that I always find strange when it comes to the quests themselves, not collectibles, but the quests themselves, which is like, oh, it's 1, 2, 3, it's this, 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 and a lot of times that surprises me, because if my quest was to go to the store, I wouldn't friggin' go to the store and buy bacon and then drive off and go to the friggin' Ace Hardware to get a hammer and then return and buy butter. I'm not a friggin' idiot. Things do go in lists. Humans, as a tendency, do put things in lists to get them done in an efficient manner. That is what you do. So to me, efficiency isn't the problem. 1, 2, 3 isn't necessarily the problem. We will use it as a narrative to explain it and to dialogue between one another. But I feel that it's not necessarily the 1, 2, 3 that is much of a negative as it is the layering that occurs between those 1, 2, 3. It's not necessarily even the steps. It's how it occurs and how it sells itself in the fiction. Because if something can sell itself in the fiction, it makes sense. I've talked about this before in other games. If a game has you go out to collect elk livers and you kill 10 elk and you only find 5 livers, your brain is like, well, were the other 5 elk on some kind of medicine or something where they didn't need a liver? It's so weird, right? It doesn't make sense, and it pushes you away. Games that layer things into creatively or effectively mend themselves into the fiction, I think, work better. And the 1, 2, 3 isn't necessarily the issue for me. For example, going to a place and taking out one enemy, then doing this, then maybe gathering something isn't as bad if they explain why maybe that item is there with that enemy. Why is this thing here? For example, there's a quest here. I'm not going to spoil it for anybody. There's a quest here you do for somebody where you take a person, the main quest giver, from one spot to another, not in an escort, but in a world building moment. Again, something Tsushima does well, where they world build during the quest. You're going for a walk during the quest. It's a sedate moment again. And when you get to the spot, that is when the other character then sort of sets up shop, and you go around, you collect some stuff, you return to them, and that person now stays there. It seems like a small thing, But that actually doesn't happen a lot of times in games. First of all, that's just one more bug that they have to test. Will the pathing work, blah, blah, blah. So they usually will just be like, hey, I'm in town. Go find what I need. Come back to town. Okay, he's jumping up and go back. Come back to town and give them the items. And here there's a couple times where things around the game world move and adjust, and everything is layered in a way that it just slightly extends the fiction. It slightly portrays a world that's a bit more varied and a bit more, once again, mobile. Everything is a bit more movement based. And I think that that's cool. It works quite well. I like that the horse is moving the grass, but I always felt that the horse appears to be a jet flying forward. It's just sort of thrusting that grass to the right and left. Let's jump in here and look at a town. To me, towns in games are one of the places where you can see a lot of times that things just aren't coming together. You'll see that it looks like it's plopped down. What I liked here, and this is something that you see mimicked in all of the better open world games, is the ability to make everything feel grounded by not only how they handled the outside, but how they handled the inside. Verticality. Do things feel slightly uneven? If you go and you look at anything old, anything directly made, prior to, 1950s, shit can just be all messed up when it comes to how everything is built and where it's built on what hill. And you get that here. You also get moments like this where these cherry blossoms have come down and got on the ground and stuck. And it's just so good looking. All of this is so pristine. And it does one more thing to make it feel like this location itself was sort of cultivated by people. This is just sort of a nice natural grounds for people to have a couple trees in the midst of this outdoor town. Now, as you take over towns, you will have people build in there. So you'll basically take over a fort or a town, and the enemies will be there, and they'll be replaced by your villagers. And usually those villagers will also bring their own items, their own supply stores. So you now have, let's say, a merchant in that location. What I like about that is you can actually see that a lot of those guys won't be in positions to where, like, let's say they would be standing under these cherry blossoms. It's not procedural. It's like they looked and were all, okay, we can't make that happen. That would be ridiculous. This guy would just be covered in cherry blossoms, which would be pretty friggin' cool, but also pretty stupid at the same time. And what I'm going to do is try to take these guys on. Now, remember, this is just a normal bandit patrol, but the way in which the game, I hit the wrong button. The way in which the game cinematically offers itself means that this is going to feel far more epic. Look at this, cherry blossoms, all the particulate in the air. I think one of these guys might have a fire weapon. And you're dead, sucker. Man, there's a lot of guys here. Boom. And... all right, so you've got some fire musket enemies there. So they'll be lighting those, and you'll be able to see how this goes. Now, there isn't any fire propagation in this game or anything like that, but with it turned down, I'm having a hard time figuring out where that enemy is. Sorry about that. Oh, man. It's so funny. I've become so reliant on using the 3D audio and just, I can't hear when they're getting ready to fire, so I'm rolling. You really don't need to roll against these guys. Well, you do sometimes because they can drop fire at your feet. There we go. And dead. There's that roll again. And dead. All right. A little less epic than it could have looked. But even not having to be perfect, looking at the way the game sort of offers those battles and makes everything feel like it's just a little bit more epic than it really is. I think that's very well done. I think a lot of that is, of course, just the way in which the game does handle the peaceful moments, the walking, the solitude. You can ride your horse. A lot of times when you are riding your horse, you will see bandits in the places with a lot of bandit, locations, that kind of thing. But in a lot of places you won't, and you can be riding for a great deal of time, and there just aren't a lot of enemies. And you're going between your fox shrine and you're going between your different places for you to meditate or different places for you to jump in and take a bath, take a swim. And it works really well when it comes to an open world and making it feel differently than other games, because I think that when you look at various open worlds, they all have their own unique feel. But what happens is they're drawn into a cyclic kind of thing when it comes to a lot of their mechanisms. So, for example, you might be playing Red Dead, you might be playing Assassin's Creed, and when you play them, you'll start to go, okay, this is a different location, it's a different this, it's a different that, but this has the same kind of crafting system, or this has this movement system, or they all have Y for dodge like Batman, or, well, I guess Assassin's Creed 1 was the one that started that. And when you play Ghost of Tsushima, there are definitely similarities that you'll get, but at the same time, because of the way it handles its world traversal and the way they want you to feel as a samurai, it just isn't really like anything else. In fact, I would say it's the same way Red Dead 2 feels, if that makes sense. So a lot of our open world games are balls to the wall, guns on the running. That's all you're doing. Just run and gun, pop and stop, scoot and shoot, right? That's pretty much everything. But what happens in Red Dead is they certainly did say, hey, you know what? We want these moments of respite. We want these moments of calm at time, but it's still more of a Tombstone than a Wyatt Earp, right? It's a little bit more of a action movie. What happens with Ghost of Tsushima is it really tries to reflect that 13 Assassins, the 47 Ronin, just the different parts to where they're trying to reflect the actual society itself, the actual samurai caste itself, as being a little less over the top than most protagonists in games. Now, when you look at their history, not necessarily entirely true. They were backstabbing at times. There was multiple battles in which entire generals and their armies would switch sides. So it's not necessarily completely something that is not lacking in all of the same things that other open world games have. But you don't get the constant spawn, what I consider is the spawn tiredness that we get in a lot of other games. It just doesn't really happen in this, and it makes it a little bit easier. I like the sense of scale here. This is that time when you're walking and you're like, damn, everything is so... This is almost its own forest of plants, which is crazy because you just don't normally see that, and it works so... We'll jump to this last spot, do a little bit of horsey riding. Verticality in open world is so important. You can get a game that can take you 2 years to walk from side to side, but if it's flat, it just will not end up engaging the gamer for very long. It just doesn't work that well unless something else is going on. And here, that's one of the great points, is that there's a lot of verticality that you can employ. There's verticality in the forts, but just traveling, it works so well. This is something Horizon Zero Dawn did very well in a lot of its areas. It's something Red Dead has done incredibly well. And of course, GTA to a lesser extent, they do... I want to make sure that's clear. If you're, I'm ignoring the planes for a second. I'm talking about just the land. They certainly do have places that you can go and ride your bike, and you can dirt bike and all that kind of stuff. But I think the modern sensibilities of that game, where you can get in a vehicle and you can do so versus a horse, I think I noticed it a little less. It was still great. It was just that when you're doing it on foot or in using another animal to get someplace, and there's some differences and difficulties there, it really helps. Looking at the sunrise, we can talk a little bit about the day-night. So Second Son didn't have day-night. It actually had baked-in lighting for specific times of day that the missions would occur in. And this one, of course, you've got your 24-hour, very truncated time frame. You know what? I'm just going to take these guys on real quick. Try to not die. I love the framing right there. Look at that. A little off-camber kind of framing there. And, I went for the juke. You're dead. Yeah, so they'll juke you, which is also very cool. Take him out. That's a great move to get. Once you get the ability to run and sprint and just slice somebody, it works so well. Look at the framing on that. Straight out of a movie, straight out of the various different anime and comic books that we've talked about. It's just, damn, it's just beautiful. And again, that draw distance is pushed out so much so that you can see all this. You can see the landscape. Landscape and trying to make it look realistic is quite difficult. You have to do something like Witcher, where they take care of, they had geography so that you could actually see things like the way stone had eroded. I talked about that in the review. You've got a game like Mad Max, which did a great job offering you multiple types of desert and somehow still making it both visually as well as just artistically interesting, at least enough for a gamer to continually remember where they are and remember these locations. And I hear something. I have a feeling there's another enemy up here. Yup. All right, what's up, suckers? Let's do this. This is the most bandits I think I've faced off in quite a long time against. Don't you try it. That's not going to happen. And take them out. Look at that sword blade shine hitting the grass. So well done. That's another thing that we've seen this generation, is the effects. We've seen it in the last generations, but as this generation's gotten more and more detailed and advanced with their games, we're starting to see those reflections hitting the world itself, and that self-shadowing on characters, those kind of things. Anytime you can do that, it makes everything appear less flat, and of course that adds that depth to it, makes it feel like it's a part of a game. The climbing in this game, little goofy, I'll admit. Dude's wearing 65 pounds of, this would be about 45 pounds of light armor, but what have you. This is very cool. This is the white dye creator, I think, or white dye manufacturer. What I liked about this is they don't just have one spot here in his area. I think I can find them. They have multiple spots that make you feel like this is a guy who does a ton of work, and he's trying to get his dyes, his clothing with the dyes dry. If you actually look, a lot of these are set up like on edges, and it just feels like this is a person who's super busy. They don't just have their stuff right next to them. Like you'll see this here, but you already saw that one stand of dye, and I'll try to find some others, but I got to show you the draw distance. That is very well done. All of those different areas that you see with smoke and stuff like that are places that you can explore and go to. You know, I hate that Bethesda basically ruined that if you see it, you can go there, but we see that in games now, and it is true. And it's true because these newer systems ended up having that extra bit of RAM for us, the ability for level designers to put more into the game. And we're going to see even more as we come up to these new systems. And of course, PC will always have your massive amount of memory and CPU. It's going to be great to see what companies can do, because this is just going to push people forward more. Ghost of Tsushima has its issues. That's not what this is about. This is about celebrating a game that feels cool to me. Ghost of Tsushima has its issues, and I think that understanding that is a part where another developer can come and say, I see what they're doing, let me fix this. It's not always about revolution, it can be evolution. And I think with gaming, there's some plagiarism and evolution all mixed together, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the way games do work, and that's the way they should technically work. Horace said a picture is a poem without words, and I think all video game developers, especially open world, that's what they're trying to do, is get you to be enveloped in that game world and interact with that game world with as little fuzz, with as little noise as can be possible. And I think Ghost of Tsushima shows other developers that there's some things that they could be doing that could help. And you mix the improvements that you see here with improvements in other games, and who knows what we'll get. And to me, that's what's really exciting. I would love to see us further investigate Tsushima and the samurai, but there's also other ancient lands that we just haven't seen any videos on, and I think it would be fantastic to see those. Looking at the different stances here before I close this out. So looking at the animations, there's some issues with the animations for sure. You can cancel out some of the heavier moves. This is all about what they've already discussed when it comes to the ability for you to fight at speed and make it look good with your parry system. I did think that there was some extra attention to detail that probably won't be noticed, but I thought it was pretty cool that regardless of what different system you're using, what different stance, your guard is actually different. The way you hold your sword for the guard is different. A stupid small thing, but a lot of developers would be like, no, we're not going to do that. The guard will always be the same because we want this or that. But here, the guard isn't the same, and it just feels a little bit more like separate stances, even though I'm not in love with that the stance system requires you to sort of do it against some enemies. But I think animation-wise, it works about as well as I would expect. Not everything's going to be perfect in a game. It's a weird time we're in where 50 games are compared to one. And you get this new game and everybody's like, well, does it equal Red Dead? And somebody else hasn't played Red Dead. They're like, does it equal GTA? Somebody hasn't played GTA and Red Dead, but they played Elix. And I'm just joking. Maybe they wouldn't compare it to Elix, but you guys get my drift. A game has to uphold against so many other things, whether it be anime. And you're going to get people who are like, oh, well, it doesn't have as good an animation as this or that. And it's like, okay, but what does it improve on in a different space? You know, and is it passable at least? Does it not look like they spent no time? Those are things that I think need to be taken in consideration when a game's trying to do at least something a little different. And Ghost of Tsushima isn't magically doing a shit ton different, but it's doing some stuff. And let's jump and wrap this up. First, I want to say thanks to everybody who's watched the video, who likes these kind of things. If you share them to places, trust me, that helps everywhere. I'm not lying. If you help them by sharing them to Facebook or Twitter through the share, it really does actually help these. And I just want to say thanks to everybody who likes these kind of videos. You know, we get a lot of analysis and tech videos, and I think that's great. Those are easily referenced. They're cataloged and categorized, and they're a little bit easier to come about and identify. But I think when you look at artistically how things work, the layering of quests, how open worlds come together, that requires a little bit more of a cerebral discussion between all of us, and not just me, but the people who are watching and what they think, what they feel. And even if you don't agree, if you're like, you know what, the layering wasn't enough in this or this quest in this game, or you watch the Witcher one and you're like, I don't care about, you know, the sound effects for feet. That's great. That's fine. You should comment those kind of things, but let's just all be nice to each other. Jesus Christ. So it's a shitty world. This is a time, at least for me in this video, where I just sort of want to celebrate a game that I think is trying to do some weird stuff, some different stuff, and succeeds and definitely doesn't succeed in some places. But where it does, really lit my fire and made me feel like there was an artistic creation here that could easily be missed if people don't want to discuss those things. So, like I said, if you get a chance, would love for you to follow me on Twitter. Feel free to share this. If you like these kind of videos, please comment and thumbs up, because I have no clue if people like these. People say they do, but I'm going to be honest, they do terrible. They do terrible views-wise. They do terrible watch-wise. But I get a shit ton of people who've even joined the Discord saying the only reason they joined the Discord or the Patreon is for Walking the Walk videos. So if that's you, I'm telling you, share this sucker or join the Patreon and tell me so that I can figure out exactly what patrons want as well. You know, before I go, I was thinking about one more thing I noticed. When you're fighting enemies and you go into forts that the enemy have taken over, the enemy has a lot of times where the AI is doing normal civil things, like you'll find them fishing. I think that does such a good job of making everything feel just a little bit more mundane and real. They're not just on patrol. A lot of them are, but some of them are not. Some of them are doing normal things. And it's not the character pissing in the corner, right? It's a character doing something that feels just a little bit in line with what a real warrior would be doing, which is, you know, they would occasionally be doing something goofy. And the idea of them fishing and still allowing for you to take them out while they're fishing, but doing a more mundane thing, a more detailed day-to-day thing, really does help a great deal. Anyway, that's it for me. Peace out, and I hope you enjoy your week.